There is something subtle, almost invisible, that begins the greatest transformations in life. It does not announce itself with fireworks or thunder. It doesn't demand attention, yet it has the power to alter entire destinies. It's that faint tug you feel when a question stirs in your mind, when something ordinary suddenly feels worth a second glance. That is curiosity, the quiet engine that powers discovery, invention, and progress. You may think it is small, but history itself has been reshaped by those who listened to that whisper, rather than silenced it. Think about it. Every monumental leap, every invention that defined a century, every breakthrough that changed how we live began not with certainty but with curiosity. A scientist doesn't stumble upon a formula by accident. They are moved by the need to know why. An entrepreneur doesn't launch a movement because everything is clear. They are driven by the irresistible itch of what if. The engine doesn't roar, it hums. It doesn't shout, it nudges. But if you follow it, if you nurture it, it grows louder, stronger, and unstoppable. Yet too often people dismiss curiosity as trivial. They silence it because they are busy, distracted, or afraid of where it may lead. But ignoring curiosity is like ignoring the first spark of a fire. The potential energy disappears before it ever becomes flame. You see, life rarely hands you breakthroughs on silver platters. It whispers them. It hides them inside a passing thought, inside a question you almost brushed off. The difference between those who live extraordinary lives and those who remain stagnant is not brilliance, luck, or privilege. It's the ability to listen to that quiet call and say, I must know more. What makes curiosity powerful is not only the answers it seeks, but the doors it opens. When you lean into it, the world becomes a landscape of possibilities rather than limitations. A problem becomes a puzzle. A failure becomes data. A roadblock becomes a detour sign pointing to a new path. Curiosity is what transforms routine into discovery. It takes the dull, gray patterns of everyday existence and breathes color back into them. Think about your own life. How many times have you felt that pull? The urge to read deeper into a subject, to ask one more question, to challenge one assumption, only to ignore it. And how different would things look if, instead of brushing it aside, you chased it with conviction? That is where the silent shift begins. The very moment you honor curiosity, you realign your path. It may not give you the entire map, but it gives you a compass, and sometimes that is all you need. So understand this. The quiet engine within you is not random. It is life itself asking you to grow. It is the invisible thread connecting you to possibilities that your present self cannot yet comprehend. To dismiss it is to turn away from evolution. To embrace it is to step into the current of progress, where the smallest questions expand into the biggest answers. The shift doesn't come from noise, from force, or from sudden lightning strikes. It comes from a whisper that you choose to follow. That whisper is curiosity, and it is waiting for you to finally listen. Before the world changes, the mind rehearses it. Every great discovery, every bold decision, every revolution of thought began not in the laboratory, not in the workshop, but in the silent stage of the imagination. The mind has this extraordinary ability. It can simulate, project, and explore outcomes without ever taking a physical step. And yet most people underestimate this gift. They rush into decisions without rehearsing them. Or worse, they repeat old patterns without ever questioning them. But those who pause, those who dare to run experiments in the theater of their mind, unlock a power that feels almost like foresight. A thought experiment is not fantasy. It is structured imagination. It's not daydreaming. It's disciplined curiosity. Think of it as the rehearsal before the performance, the blueprint before the building, the flight simulation before the launch. You imagine variables, outcomes, and consequences in a space where failure costs nothing, where risk is zero, but clarity is infinite. And when you finally act, you are not stepping into the unknown blindly. You are walking into a landscape you've already mapped. History proves the power of this approach. The greatest scientific breakthroughs were born this way. Imagine someone sitting in a quiet room asking, what would happen if I traveled at the speed of light? That single imaginative experiment reshaped physics. Or think of inventors who held models of machines only in their minds before they built them. What united them was not access to wealth or resources. It was the courage to let the imagination construct realities before the world demanded proof. And here is where it matters for you. Every decision you face, from the smallest personal choice to the largest life-changing leap, can be tested in this mental laboratory. The challenge is not to predict the future perfectly, but to sharpen your awareness of possibilities. You ask yourself, if I take this path, what will it look like? If I choose differently, what chain of events might unfold? You run the experiment in your head, and suddenly the unknown feels less like chaos and more like a set of options you can navigate. Most people are paralyzed by fear because they see the unknown as a black wall. But a thought experiment cracks the wall open. It shows you windows, doors, hidden staircases you would never have seen otherwise. And once you've seen them, courage becomes easier. Action becomes natural. You stop being trapped by indecision and start being guided by vision. This is not just a technique for scientists or inventors. It is a principle of living. Rehearse before you leap. Imagine outcomes before they arrive. Not to paralyze yourself with overthinking, but to move forward with clarity. Life is not about blindly stepping into darkness. It is about lighting the path in your mind so that when you walk with confidence. So understand this. Your mind is not just a storage house of memories. It is a laboratory of futures. And if you dare to use it, if you rehearse reality before you leap, you will find that the impossible becomes possible, because you've already walked it in. Thought before you live it in truth. There is a difference between following the path that already exists and daring to cut a new trail through the forest. Most people spend their lives asking, how do I do what others have done? They search for blueprints, copy routines, and replicate solutions. But true breakthroughs never come from imitation. They come from stripping problems down to their bones, to their essence, to their first principles, and asking not, how has it always been done? But why must it be done this way at all? When you start asking why instead of how, the world begins to unravel in front of you. You see that most of what people call truth is nothing more than habit, assumption, or tradition. People cling to methods not because they are the best, but because they are familiar. They drive down the same roads even when they no longer lead to progress. And so the majority live inside invisible prisons built by the question how. But the minority, the inventors, the builders, the creators, they cut through the walls by asking why. Think about it. Some of the greatest innovations in history were born from this mindset. Airplanes did not exist because someone asked, how can I make a faster horse? They existed because someone asked, why must flight be impossible? Electric light wasn't born from the question, how can I improve the candle? It was born from asking, why do we accept darkness when we can command light? The transformation of civilization happens not when we polish the old, but when we dare to dismantle it and rebuild from the ground up. And this is not just about technology or science. It is about your life. How often do you stop and ask, why am I pursuing this job? Why am I living this way? Why do I believe what I believe? Most people are trapped because they are constantly asking, how can I survive within the system I've been given? Instead of asking, why must I live inside that system at all? This is why so many stay stuck. They are perfecting routines that were never meant for them, polishing cages instead of walking free. When you dare to ask why, you reclaim authority over your choices. You stop letting society hand you scripts and start writing your own. You see that limitations often exist only because no one has challenged them. And once you recognize that, you become dangerous to mediocrity. You become someone who doesn't just solve problems but redefines them. The question how maintains the status quo. The question why rewrites it. That is the power of first principles. It is not about finding better instructions. It is about rejecting the need for instructions altogether and daring to start from the beginning. When you learn to think this way, nothing remains untouchable. Obstacles lose their permanence. Traditions lose their grip. The future stops being a copy of the past and starts becoming a creation of your design. So remember this, don't just ask how do I keep up. Ask why must I follow it all? Because the ones who dare to ask why are the ones who build what the world has never seen before. We are taught to fear uncertainty as if it were an enemy. From childhood, we are told to find answers, to cling to certainty, to stay within the boundaries of the known. Yet life itself is built on uncertainty. The future is unwritten, tomorrow is unpredictable, and even the next breath is not promised. To resist uncertainty is to resist life itself. But here is the paradox. The very thing most people fear is the very soil from which growth, innovation, and transformation are born. The unknown is not a void. It is a canvas. Think about it. Every breakthrough in human history came from stepping into uncertainty. The explorer sailing into seas with no map. The dreamer sketching an invention no one believed possible. The thinker challenging the beliefs of their age. None of them knew the outcome. None of them had guarantees. What they had was the courage to treat uncertainty not as a threat but as a teacher, and that is where their power came from. The truth is, certainty is comforting, but it is also limiting. It locks you inside what has already been proven, what has already been done. Certainty builds walls. Uncertainty opens doors. When you allow yourself to stand in the unknown, you gain access to paths that were invisible before. It is uncomfortable, yes, but discomfort is the birthplace of possibility. If everything was predictable, nothing would ever change. Most people run from uncertainty because it makes them feel exposed. They mistake not knowing for weakness. But what if you shifted your perspective? What if you saw uncertainty not as a threat to your control, but as evidence of new opportunities unfolding? The unknown is not a blank space waiting to trap you. It is a field of potential waiting to be explored. You don't need to see the entire road to take the first step. You only need the courage to begin, trusting that clarity reveals itself in motion. And here is the key. Uncertainty doesn't mean chaos. It doesn't mean recklessness. It means possibility. It means room to test, to explore, to grow. When you step into the unknown, you give yourself permission to learn. Every unanswered question becomes an opening. Every unclear path becomes a chance to build something that has never existed before. This is why those who embrace uncertainty often achieve what others call impossible, because they were willing to walk where the map ended. Ask yourself, how many opportunities have you lost because you waited for certainty? How many times did you stand still, hoping for guarantees that never came? The truth is, certainty never arrives before the leap. It only comes after. You don't get the proof before you take the risk. You get the proof because you took it. So let the unknown be your ally. Welcome it. Step into it. See it not as a dark void, but as the birthplace of every possibility your future holds. Because the moment you stop fearing uncertainty is the moment you stop living small. The unknown will always be there. But whether it imprisons you or empowers you depends entirely on how you choose to face it. There is a quiet revolution in the way ideas are born. Some minds copy, others recompose. Imitation is comfortable. It loops familiar patterns and hands you a safe map. Imagination is dangerous. It asks you to tear up that map, to stand naked before a problem and ask not how it's been solved before, but what the problem truly is when every assumption is stripped away. Building from first principles is the discipline of that danger, the practice of reconstructing reality from its simplest truths so you can invent solutions the world has not yet imagined. When you imitate, you inherit the limits of what came before. You polish a tool someone else made, but you rarely ask whether the tool is the right thing to begin with. Imagination, by contrast, disassembles the toolbox. It asks which pieces are fundamental and which are relics of convenience. From that plain foundation, you begin to stitch new machines, simpler, more elegant, more suited to the true demands of the problem. The result is not novelty for its own sake. It is efficiency, clarity, and a kind of freedom that only comes when you stop being bound by precedent. To think from first principles is to interrogate reality with childlike precision and adult rigor. You peel back the layers of explanation until you find the irreducible facts. What must be true no matter the story told around it? What cannot be simplified further? These questions do not dismiss experience. They honor it by refusing to let habit masquerade for insight. When you locate the true constants, you can rearrange everything else. What looked impossible becomes a composition problem rather than a miracle. Imagination without discipline is fanciful. Imitation without curiosity is complacent. The power comes when you marry the two. When you allow your imagination to invent and your rigor to test. The mind that builds from first principles treats every accepted answer as provisional, every tradition as negotiable. It refuses to accept that the way something has always been done is the way it must be done tomorrow. That refusal is the seed of progress. Consider the small acts that reveal this habit. Asking the naive question in a meeting that everyone else avoided. Sketching an alternate model on the back of a napkin while others debate incremental fixes. Refusing the default because your sense of the problem reaches deeper. These are not grand gestures. They are the steady, almost imperceptible choices that compound into radical change. The person who habitually reconstructs problems from their roots becomes a continual source of renewal, not only for themselves but for the teams and communities they touch. And there is a moral urgency to this practice. In a world of copycats and echo chambers, real solutions are scarce. Our challenges, technological, social, ecological, will not bend under more of the same. They require minds willing to dismantle comfortable narratives and to design from the core. That is not easy. It is the work of patience and stubborn curiosity. It asks for the courage to be misunderstood at first, to fail elegantly, and to return to the basics until something true and useful emerges. So choose imagination that does the hard work of first principles. Let imitation serve as the study of what exists, not as a prescription for what is inevitable. When you rebuild from the ground up, you stop solving yesterday's problems and start inventing tomorrow's answers. In that space, creativity is not imitation's cousin. It is its successor, a force that changes not merely products or policies, but the very questions we ask of the world. When people think of progress, they often imagine giant leaps, revolutionary breakthroughs, or overnight transformations. But the truth is that the foundation of every monumental change rests on something deceptively small, tiny experiments. The world is moved forward not by sudden bursts of genius, but by countless small tests, each one a step in a loop of learning. Hypothesize, test, record, adapt. It is through this steady rhythm that ideas are shaped, refined, and eventually scaled into something powerful enough to alter lives. Big dreams without experimentation are castles in the air, beautiful but hollow. Experiments anchor imagination to reality. They allow you to ask not only what if, but what happens if. That subtle shift is everything. It turns vague hope into measurable insight. It gives you feedback, data, and direction. A tiny experiment costs little, risks little, but teaches much. And when multiplied over weeks, months, years, the compounding lessons from these small trials create a trajectory of unstoppable momentum. Think about the scientific method. No discovery came from a single stroke of brilliance that worked perfectly the first time. Each advancement was born from a cycle. Form a hypothesis, test it, measure the results, and then adapt. Thomas Edison tested thousands of filament materials before the light bulb shone reliably. The Wright brothers ran countless wind tunnel trials with model wings before flight ever lifted from the ground. What looks like sudden brilliance from the outside is, in reality, the slow accumulation of lessons learned through deliberate experimentation. This loop is not limited to science or engineering. It applies to every area of life. You want to get healthier? Don't overhaul everything at once. Test small. Drink more water for a week. Track how it feels. You want to start a business? Don't launch with a grand, untested plan. Try a small offer, see how people respond, refine the idea. You want to grow as a leader? Experiment with listening more in one meeting. Observe the impact, adapt. The pattern is universal. Small, measurable, repeatable tests. And the beauty of this approach is that it lowers the fear of failure. When experiments are tiny, failure is cheap. It doesn't crush you. It teaches you. It doesn't ruin the journey. It accelerates it. Every failed test is not a setback but a compass adjustment, pointing you closer to what will work. Imagine if you embraced failure this way, as data, as guidance, as progress disguised. Suddenly, the fear that paralyzes most people becomes fuel that drives you forward. Scaling is the natural consequence of this discipline. When you've run enough tiny experiments, the patterns emerge. You see what consistently works, what resonates, what endures. That is what you amplify. Scaling becomes safe because it's no longer guesswork. It's building on proven insight. And that's how revolutions in business, science, art, or personal growth happen. Not from betting everything on a grand gamble, but from multiplying what tiny experiments have already proven true. Failure is a word that frightens many, but in truth it is one of the most valuable teachers we will ever encounter. Every failed attempt is not the end of a story. It is a page in the manual of progress. The difference between those who stagnate and those who grow is not that the latter avoid failure, but that they know how to convert loss into evidence. Each setback holds information. Each disappointment carries data. If you are willing to examine it, record it, and adapt from it, failure becomes not a barrier but a bridge to the next step forward. The tragedy is that most people walk away too quickly. They fail once and interpret it as a verdict on their worth, their talent, or their destiny. But failure is never a verdict. It is feedback. It is the universe handing you raw notes saying, "Not this way, try another." Imagine if a scientist abandoned the lab after one experiment gone wrong. Imagine if a musician quit after hitting a wrong note. Progress demands more of us. The ability to treat failure as a messenger, not an enemy. Turning failure into evidence begins with reframing. Instead of asking, "Why did I fail?" ask, "What did this attempt teach me?" That subtle shift moves you from shame to inquiry, from paralysis to curiosity. It transforms the emotional weight of the moment into a practical opportunity. Did you aim too high too quickly? Did you ignore a warning sign? Did you misjudge your resources? Every detail you collect sharpens the next hypothesis. You are not starting over from zero. You are starting over from experience. History is full of examples of people who understood this. Edison famously said he didn't fail 1,000 times at making a light bulb. He discovered 1,000 ways that didn't work. The Wright brothers measured the crashes as carefully as they measured the flights. Entrepreneurs who build empires do so not because they avoided loss, but because they analyzed it, adjusted, and tried again. What looks like resilience is actually method, treating failure as data. This method is accessible to everyone. After each setback, write down what went wrong, what factors you controlled, and what was outside your control. Identify what you can test differently next time. Adjust the variables, then re-enter the arena. This is not glamorous work. It is often quiet, repetitive, and humbling. But it is the groundwork of mastery. The person who masters this cycle becomes unstoppable because they are no longer afraid of loss. Every failure only accelerates their progress. And here lies the paradox. Those who fear failure most remain stuck, while those who embrace it as evidence grow fastest. To live a life of significance is to accept that falling is part of moving. To deny failure is to deny the very process of learning. But to study failure, to collect its lessons, is to create a foundation so strong that success eventually becomes inevitable. So the next time you stumble, resist the urge to close the book. Open it wider. Take notes. Let the failure speak, because in every misstep lies the precise data you need to chart your next breakthrough. An idea is born in silence, often fragile, a flicker in the solitude of your mind. But its true power is revealed only when it escapes you, when it travels into the minds of others. Knowledge hoarded is knowledge weakened. Insight kept private is like a star unseen. The telescope of society magnifies what you share, allowing it to reach farther, shine brighter, and influence more than you alone ever could. This is the social telescope, the recognition that ideas expand when they are transmitted. Think of history's most transformative thoughts. They were not locked in journals or hidden in laboratories. They were shared, debated, refined, and multiplied. A single idea, when expressed, can ignite a movement. It can cross borders, languages, and generations. But for this to happen, the idea must be portable. Simple enough to be carried by memory, contagious enough to spread from person to person, and useful enough to be worth passing on. The power of an idea is not only in its brilliance but in its ability to travel. To make your insights portable, you must first distill them. Complexity may impress, but simplicity spreads. Strip away excess until the essence remains. What is the core truth you want others to carry? Reduce it to a sentence, a phrase, a metaphor that sticks. When a truth can be spoken without notes, remembered without effort, and retold without distortion, you have made it portable. It becomes a seed ready to plant itself in new soil. Contagion is the next layer. Ideas spread not only because of their content, but because of their emotional charge. When an idea makes people feel inspired, challenged, moved, unsettled, it compels them to share it. Think of how stories travel, not because they are technically flawless, but because they stir something inside us. To amplify your ideas, tie them to narrative. Wrap facts in story, weave logic into emotion. This way, the idea does not just live in the mind, it resonates in the heart. Usefulness is the final key. An idea that cannot be applied will not endure. People share what improves their lives or the lives of those around them. Ask yourself, how can this insight solve a problem? How can it make someone's day easier, their choices clearer, their world more meaningful? When you provide not only thought but also utility, you ensure your idea is not only heard but used. And when it is used, it spreads naturally. And remember, sharing ideas is not a loss of ownership, it is multiplication. The more you give, the more they grow. Some will carry your idea further than you ever could. Some will reshape it, refine it, and return it to you richer than before. This is how knowledge evolves, how revolutions are born, how the future is written. So don't let your insights remain confined. Lift them through the social telescope. Speak them, write them, share them boldly. The light of an idea intensifies when it reflects across many minds, and the thought you share today may become the star that guides generations tomorrow. Up until now, we've explored imagination, first principles, experimentation, failure, and the social telescope of shared ideas. Each of these on its own is powerful, but the true transformation happens when they stop being occasional tools and become a living rhythm, woven into your daily life. This is the living equation, a formula not written in textbooks but in the way you wake, the way you decide, the way you approach every moment with wonder. It is not theory, it is practice. It is not something you switch on when convenient, it is something you embody. The living equation begins with a posture of curiosity. Instead of starting your day with assumptions, start it with questions. What can I see differently today? What problem can I take apart and rebuild? What experiment can I run, no matter how small? This attitude shifts your life from autopilot to discovery. You no longer move through the world as a passive participant, but as an active designer, constantly seeking new patterns, new insights, new connections. Decisions, too, become transformed through this lens. Instead of reacting blindly, you process choices through the framework of first principles. What is really at the root of this decision? What assumptions am I carrying that may not be true? What simple truth can guide me here? By slowing down enough to apply this equation, you create clarity in moments where others only see chaos. You cut through the noise and align your actions with what is essential, not what is merely traditional or expected. Projects, whether personal or professional, take on new life when shaped by the living equation. You stop waiting for perfect plans and instead begin with tiny experiments. Each day becomes an opportunity to test, to learn, to adapt. When things go wrong, and as they inevitably will, you do not crumble. You record the evidence, refine the hypothesis, and take the next step. This cycle, repeated daily, compounds into mastery. What begins as small motions becomes a relentless engine of progress. Sharing becomes a natural extension of the practice. As you collect insights, you don't hoard them. You amplify them through the social telescope. Every idea you express adds to the collective reservoir of knowledge. And as your thoughts spread, they return to you reshaped and enriched by others, feeding back into the equation and expanding its reach. But here lies the heart of it: wonder. Without wonder, the equation becomes mechanical, lifeless, another checklist in a world full of obligations. With wonder, it becomes alive. Wonder makes even the smallest experiment feel like exploration. It makes failure tolerable because curiosity about what comes next is stronger than the sting of loss. It makes sharing joyful because you are not trying to dominate others with your knowledge, but to invite them into discovery. The living equation is not a rigid formula. It is an attitude, a rhythm, a commitment to live as though every moment carries hidden treasure. It is choosing to meet the world not with cynicism, but with the eyes of a scientist, an artist, a child. And when you practice this daily, when curiosity, experimentation, resilience, sharing, and wonder converge, life itself becomes an unfolding horizon where discovery is not rare but routine, not accidental but inevitable.